Hello and good afternoon. Sorry I had to restart this because for some reason YouTube decided to shut me down. But in any case, today I'm going to read to you from Dr. Jung's essay entitled Flying Saucers, a Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Skies. Now, I'm not going to be able to get through this entire essay today because it's 120 pages long, and so I've broken it up into about 7 parts, which I'll ultimately put in a playlist. And so today I'm going to start with part 1, which is UFOs as rumors. But if you think you're here because Dr. Jung is going to tell you that UFOs are in the physical world, you're in the wrong place, and I'm not going to tell you that either. But I will acknowledge that UFOs are psychic facts, not physical facts. And if you think that UFOs are physical facts, I don't deny that it's possible. However, think about the distances involved. My wife and I often watch videos about the size of the universe and about different aspects about the universe. And you have to understand that the nearest star to us is 4 light years away. Now, 1 light year is 6 trillion miles. So the nearest star to us is 24 trillion miles from the Earth. And at the fastest speed that a human object has ever traveled, which I believe is the Deep Horizon spacecraft that went past Pluto, that spacecraft is traveling at 35 miles per second. And it would take it, if it were aimed at the nearest star, which it isn't, it would take it about 100,000 years to get to that closest star. And I learned last night that the closest habitable planet that we're aware of as of now is 20 light years away. So that's 120 trillion miles. And it would take about 500,000 years to get there at the fastest speed that humans have ever traveled. And that's just the closest objects in our galaxy. Our galaxy is 100,000 miles, or 100,000 light years across. So that's about, 600,000 trillion. So that's 6 quintillion, I guess, or 6 quadrillion. No, I'm sorry. 600 trillion miles across. And that's just in our galaxy. So when we talk about the spaces, my wife says, well, we live in a giant isolation ward. And the idea that someone is going to come here and try to harvest our natural resources, I think that seems a little bit odd. But it doesn't change the fact that there are psychological issues associated with UFOs. And so I'm going to read Dr. Jung's essay, which is about UFOs and from a psychiatrist's point of view. So please understand. So UFOs are psychic facts, and he never acknowledges in this, so I'll save you the trouble, he never acknowledges in this essay of 120 pages that they are physical facts, and I will not do that. If we ever physically see one, well, that'll be a different story. But anyway, Preface to the first English edition. The worldwide rumor about flying saucers presents a problem that challenges the psychologist for a number of reasons. The primary question, and apparently this is the most important point, is this: are they real or are they mere fantasy products? This question is by no means settled yet. If they are real, exactly what are they? If they are fantasy, why should such a rumor exist? In this latter respect, I have made an interesting and quite unexpected discovery. In 1954, I wrote an article in the Swiss weekly World Watch, in which I expressed myself in a skeptical way, though I spoke with due respect of the serious opinion of a relatively large number of air specialists who believe in the reality of UFOs. In 1958, this interview was suddenly discovered by the world press, and the news spread like wildfire from the far west round the earth to the far east. But alas, in distorted form. I was quoted as a saucer believer. I issued a statement in the United Press and gave a true version of my opinion, but this time the wire went dead. Nobody, so far as I know, took any notice of it except one German newspaper. The moral of this story is rather interesting. As the behavior of the press is a sort of Gallup test with reference to world opinion, one must draw the conclusion that news affirming the existence of UFOs is welcome, but that skepticism seems to be undesirable. To believe that UFOs are real suits the general opinion, whereas disbelief is to be discouraged. This creates the impression that there is a tendency all over the world to believe in saucers and to want them to be real, unconsciously helped by a press that otherwise has no sympathy with the phenomenon. This remarkable fact in itself surely merits the psychologist's interest. Why should it be more desirable for saucers to exist than not? The following pages are an attempt to answer this question. I have relieved the text of cumbersome footnotes, except for a few which give the references for the interested reader. C.G. Jung, September 1958. Introductory. It is difficult to form a correct estimate of the significance of contemporary events, and the danger that our judgment will remain caught in subjectivity is great. In other words, our judgment caught in subjectivity means our opinions. So I am fully aware of the risk I am taking in proposing to communicate my views concerning certain contemporary events, which seem to me important, to those who are patient enough to hear me. I refer to those reports reaching us from all corners of the earth, rumors of round objects that flash through the troposphere and stratosphere and go by the name of flying saucers, soup coops, discs, and UFOs, unidentified flying objects. These rumors, or the possible physical existence of such objects, seems to me so significant that I feel myself compelled, as once before, when events of fateful consequence were brewing for Europe, to sound a note of warning. I know that, just as before, my voice is much too weak to reach the ear of the multitude. It is not presumption that drives me, but my conscience as a psychiatrist that bids me fulfill my duty and prepare those few who will hear me for coming events which are in accord with the end of an era. As we know from ancient Egyptian history, they are manifestations of psychic changes which always appear at the end of one platonic month and at the beginning of another. Apparently, they are changes in the constellation of psychic dominance, of the archetypes, or gods as they used to be called, which bring about or accompany long-lasting transformations of the collective psyche. This transformation started in the historical era and left its traces first in the passing of the Aeon of Taurus into that of Aries, and then of Aries into Pisces, whose beginning coincides with the rise of Christianity. We are now nearing the great change which may be expected when the spring point enters Aquarius. It would be frivolous of me to try to conceal from the reader that such reflections are not only exceedingly unpopular, but even come perilously close to those turbid fantasies which becloud the minds of world reformers and other interpreters of signs and portents. But I must take this risk, even if it means putting my hard-won reputation for truthfulness, reliability, and capacity for scientific judgment in jeopardy. I can assure my readers that I do not do this with a light heart. I am, to be quite frank, concerned for all those who are caught unprepared by the events in question and disconcerted by their incomprehensible nature. Since, so far as I know, no one has yet felt moved to examine and set forth the possible psychic consequences of this foreseeable astrological change, I deem it my duty to do what I can in this respect. I undertake this thankless task in the expectation that my chisel will make no impression on the hard stone it encounters. Some time ago, I published a statement in which I considered the nature of flying saucers. I came to the same conclusion as Edward J. Ruppelt, one-time chief of the American Air Force's project for investigating UFO reports. The conclusion is, something is seen, but one doesn't know what. It is difficult, if it not impossible, to form any correct idea of these objects because they behave not like bodies but like weightless thoughts. Up till now, there has been no indisputable proof of the physical existence of UFOs except for the cases picked up by radar. I have discussed the reliability of these radar observations with Professor Max Knoll, a specialist in this field. What he has to say is not encouraging. Nevertheless, there do seem to be authenticated cases where the visual observation was confirmed by a simultaneous radar echo. I would like to call the reader's attention to Kehoe's books, which are based on official material and studiously avoid the wild speculation, naivete, or prejudice of other publications. For a decade, the physical reality of UFOs remained a very problematic matter, which was not decided one way or the other with the necessary clarity, despite the mass of observational material that had accumulated in the meantime. The longer the uncertainty lasted, the greater became the probability that this obviously complicated phenomenon had an extremely important psychic component as well as a possible physical basis. This is not surprising in that we are dealing with an ostensibly physical phenomenon distinguished on the one hand by its frequent appearances and on the other by its strange, unknown, and indeed contradictory nature. Such an object provokes, like nothing else, conscious and unconscious fantasies, the former giving rise to speculative conjectures and pure fabrications, and the latter supplying the mythological background inseparable from these provocative observations. Thus, there arose a situation in which, with the best will in the world, one often did not know and could not discover whether a primary perception was followed by a phantasm, or whether, conversely, a primary fantasy originating in the unconscious invaded the conscious mind with illusions and visions. The material that has become known to me during the past 10 years lends support to both hypotheses. In the first case, an objectively real physical process forms the basis for an accompanying myth. In the second case, an archetype creates the corresponding vision. To these two causal relationships, we must add a third possibility, namely, that of a synchronistic, i.e., acausal, meaningful coincidence, a problem that has occupied men's minds ever since the time of Galenx, Leibniz, and Schopenhauer. It is an hypothesis that has special bearing on phenomenon connected with archetypal psychic processes. As a psychiatrist, I am not qualified to contribute anything useful to the question of the physical reality of UFOs. I can concern myself only with their undoubted psychic aspect, and in what follows shall deal almost exclusively with their psychic concomitants. So, we seem to have a following here. Everybody wants to know about UFOs. But as I said, Dr. Jung is introducing this as psychic facts and how they may come up as psychic facts and not as physical facts. And as my wife often says, we live in a huge isolation ward, so to think that anybody is coming to Earth to harvest our raw materials, they can probably find them closer to home, much as we might someday find raw materials on Mars. So, number 1, UFOs as rumors, paragraph 595. And I'm reading today from Carl Jung's Civilization and Transition, which is volume 10 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. Since the things reported of UFOs not only sound incredible, but seem to fly in the face of all our basic assumptions about the physical world, it is very natural that one's first reaction should be the negative one of outright rejection. Surely, we say, it's nothing but illusions, fantasies, and lies. People who report such stuff, chiefly airline pilots and ground staff, cannot be quite right in the head. What is worse, most of these stories come from America, the land of superlatives and of science fiction. Sorry. I'll read that sentence again if I can. What is worse, most of these stories come from America, the land of superlatives and of science fiction. In order to meet this natural reaction, we shall begin by considering the UFO reports simply as rumors, i.e., as psychic products, and shall draw from this all the conclusions that are warranted by an analytical method of procedure. Regarded in this light, the UFO reports may seem to the skeptical mind to be rather like a story that is told all over the world, but differs from an ordinary rumor in that it is expressed in the form of visions, or perhaps owed its existence to them in the first place, and is now kept alive by them. I would call this comparatively rare variation a visionary rumor. It is closely akin to the collective visions of, say, the Crusaders during the siege of Jerusalem, the troops at Mons in the First World War, the faithful followers of the Pope at Fatima, Portugal, etc. Apart from collective visions, there are on record cases where one or more persons see something that physically is not there. For instance, I was once at a spiritualistic seance where 4 of the 5 people present saw an object like a moon floating above the abdomen of the medium. They showed me, the 5th person present, exactly where it was, and it was absolutely incomprehensible to them that I could see nothing of the sort. I know of 3 more cases where certain objects were seen in the clearest detail. In 2 of them by 2 persons, and in the 3rd by 1 person, and could afterwards be proved to be non-existent. 2 of these cases happened under my direct observation. Even people who are entirely compos mentis and in full possession of their senses can sometimes see things that do not exist. I do not know what the explanation is of such happenings. It is very possible that they are less rare than I am inclined to suppose, for as a rule we do not verify things we have seen with our own eyes, and so we never get to know what actually they did. We never get to For as a rule, we do not verify things we have seen with our own eyes, and so we never get to know that actually they did not exist. I mentioned these somewhat remote possibilities because, in such an unusual matter as the UFOs, one has to take every aspect into account. The first requisite for a visionary rumor, as distinct from an ordinary rumor, for whose dissemination nothing more is needed than popular curiosity and sensation-mongering, is always an unusual emotion. Its intensification into a vision and delusion of the senses, however, springs from a stronger excitation and therefore from a deeper source. The signal for the UFO stories was given by the mysterious projectiles seen over Sweden during the last 2 years of the war, attributed, of course, to the Russians, and by the reports about Foo fighters, i.e., lights that accompanied the Allied bombers over Germany. Foo equals feu. These were followed by the strange sightings of flying saucers in America. The impossibility of finding an earthly base for the UFOs and of explaining their physical peculiarities soon led to the conjecture of an extraterrestrial origin. With this development, the rumor got linked up with the psychology of the Great Panic that broke out in the United States just before the Second World War, when a radio play based on a novel by H.G. Wells about Martians invading New York caused a regular stampede and numerous car accidents. The play evidently hit the latent emotion connected with the imminence of war. He's talking about War of the Worlds, adapted by Orson Welles in 1938. Thank you, Peter. Okay, going on. Paragraph 600. The motif of an extraterrestrial starting again. Paragraph 600. The motif of an extraterrestrial invasion was seized upon by the rumor, and the UFOs were interpreted as machines controlled by intelligent beings from outer space. The apparently weightless behavior of spaceships and their intelligent purposive movements were attributed to the superior technical knowledge and ability of the cosmic intruders. As they did no harm and refrained from all hostile acts, it was assumed that their appearance over the earth was due to curiosity or to the need for aerial reconnaissance. It also seemed that airfields and atomic installations in particular held a special attraction for them, from which it was concluded that the dangerous development of atomic physics and nuclear fission had caused a certain disquiet on our neighboring planets and necessitated a more accurate survey from the air. As a result, people felt they were being observed and spied upon from space. The rumor actually gained so much official recognition that the armed forces in America set up a special bureau for collecting, analyzing, and evaluating all relevant observations. This seems to have been done also in France, Italy, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and other countries. After the publication of Ruppelt's report, the saucer stories seem to have more or less vanished from the press for about a year. They were evidently no longer news. That the interest in UFOs and probably the sightings of them have not ceased is shown by the recent press report that an American admiral has suggested that clubs be founded all over the country for collecting UFO reports and investigating them in detail. The rumor states that the UFOs are, as a rule, lens-shaped, but can also be oblong or shaped like cigars, that they shine in various colors or have a metallic glitter, that from a stationary position they can reach a speed of about 10,000 miles per hour, and that at times their acceleration is such that if anything resembling a human being were steering them, he would be instantly killed. In flight, they turn off at angles that would be possible only to a weightless object. I'll just mention that my father did tell me a story about being on the roof of our garage in upstate New York and having seen a UFO, and he points it says over in that direction, and over in that direction was Griffiths Air Force Base, where I'm sure we were doing a lot of testing back in those days. But my father saw what he saw. Paragraph 603. Their flight accordingly resembles that of a flying insect. Like this, the UFO can suddenly hover over an interesting object for quite a time, or circle round it inquisitively, just as suddenly to dart off again and discover new objects in its zigzag flight. UFOs are therefore not to be confused with meteorites or with reflections from so-called temperature inversion layers. Their alleged interest in airfields and in industrial installations connected with nuclear fission is not always confirmed, since they are also seen in the Antarctic, in the Sahara, and in the Himalayas. For preference, however, they seem to swarm over the United States. For preference, however, they seem to swarm over the United States, though recent reports show that they do a good deal of flying over the Old World and in the Far East. Nobody really knows what they are looking for or want to observe. Our airplanes seem to arouse their curiosity, for they often fly towards them or pursue them, but they also fly away from them. Their flights do not appear to be based on any recognizable system. They behave more like groups of tourists unsystematically viewing the countryside, pausing now here for a while, now there, erratically following first one interest and then another, sometimes shooting to enormous altitudes for inexplicable reasons, or performing acrobatic evolutions before the noses of exasperated pilots. Sometimes they appear to be up to 500 yards in diameter, sometimes small as electric street lamps. They are large motherships from which little UFOs slip out or in which they take shelter. They are said to be both manned and unmanned, and in the latter case are remote controlled. According to the rumor, the occupants are about 3 feet high and look like human beings, or conversely, are utterly unlike us. Other reports speak of giants 15 feet high. They are beings who are carrying out a cautious survey of the earth and considerately avoid all encounters with men, or, more menacingly, are spying out land places with a view of settling the population of a planet that has got into difficulties and colonizing the earth by force. Uncertainty in regard to the physical conditions on Earth and their fear of unknown sources of infection have held them back temporarily from drastic encounters and even from attempted landings, although they possess frightful weapons which would enable them to exterminate the human race. In addition to their obviously superior technology, they are credited with superior wisdom and moral goodness, which would, on the other hand, enable them to save humanity. Naturally, there are stories of landings, too, when the saucer men were not only seen at close quarters, but attempted to carry off a human being. Even a reliable man like Kehoe gives us to understand that a squadron of 5 military aircraft, plus a large seaplane, were swallowed up by UFO motherships in the vicinity of the Bahamas and carried off. One's hair stands on end when one reads such reports together with the documentary evidence, and when one considers the known possibility of tracking UFOs with radar, then we have all the essentials for an unsurpassable science fiction story. Every man who prides himself on his sound common sense will feel distinctly affronted. I shall therefore not enter here into the various attempts at explanation to which the rumor has given rise. Paragraph 605. While I was engaged in writing this essay, it so happened that 2 articles appeared more or less simultaneously in leading American newspapers, showing very clearly how the problem stands at present. The first was a report on the latest UFO sighting by a pilot who was flying an aircraft to Puerto Rico with 45 passengers. While he was over the ocean, he saw a fiery round object shining with greenish-white light coming towards him at great speed. At first he thought it was a jet-propelled aircraft, but soon saw that it was some unusual and unknown object. In order to avoid a collision, he pulled his aircraft into such a steep climb that the passengers were shot out of their seats and tumbled over one another. 4 of them received injuries requiring hospital attention. 7 other aircraft strung out along the same route at about 300 miles sighted the same object. The other article, entitled "No Flying Saucers, U.S. Expert Says," concerns the categorical statement made by Dr. Hugh L. Dryden, director of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, that UFOs do not exist. One cannot but respect the unflinching skepticism of Dr. Dryden. It gives stout-hearted expression to the feeling that such preposterous rumors are an offense to human dignity. If we close our eyes a little so as to overlook certain details, it is possible to side with the reasonable opinion of the majority in whose name Dr. Dryden speaks, and to regard the thousands of UFO reports and the uproar they have created as a visionary rumor, to be treated accordingly. They would then boil down objectively to an admittedly impressive collection of mistaken observations and conclusions into which subjective psychic assumptions had been projected. I'll rest my eyes here for a moment. Okay, I'm reading from Flying Saucers, a Modern Myth by C.G. Jung, written about 1958 when he was 82 years old. If you're looking for physical proof of flying saucers from Dr. Jung, you better go look someplace else. This is about the psychic fact of flying saucers in the psyche. And I'm reading from the part of this long essay entitled UFOs as Rumours, paragraph 608. But if it is a case of psychological projection, there must be a psychic cause for it. One can hardly suppose that anything of such worldwide incidence as the UFO legend is purely fortuitous or of no importance whatever. The many thousands of individual testimonies must have an equally extensive causal basis. When an assertion of this kind is corroborated practically everywhere, we are driven to assume that a corresponding motive must be present everywhere too. Though visionary rumors may be caused or accompanied by all manner of outward circumstances, they are based essentially on an omnipresent emotional foundation, in this case a psychological situation common to all mankind. The basis for this kind of rumor is an emotional tension having its cause in a situation of collective distress or danger, or in a vital psychic need. This condition undoubtedly exists today, insofar as the whole world is suffering under the strain of Russian policies and their still unpredictable consequences. In the individual, too, such phenomena are abnormal convictions, visions, illusions, etc., only occur when he is suffering from a psychic dissociation, that is, when there is a split between the conscious attitude and the unconscious contents opposed to it. Precisely because the conscious mind does not know about them and is therefore confronted with a situation from which there seems to be no way out, these strange contents cannot be integrated directly, but seek to express themselves indirectly, thus giving rise to unexpected and apparently inexplicable opinions, beliefs, illusions, visions, and so forth. Any unusual natural occurrences, such as meteors, comets, rains of blood, a calf with two heads, and such like abortions, are interpreted as menacing omens, or else signs are seen in the heavens. Things can be seen by many people independently of one another, and even simultaneously, which are not physically real. Also, the association processes of many people often have a parallelism in time and space, with the result that different people simultaneously and independently of one another can produce the same new ideas, as has happened numerous times in history. Paragraph 609. In addition, there are cases where the same collective cause produces identical or similar effects, i.e., the same visionary images and interpretations, in the very people who are least prepared for such phenomena and least inclined to believe in them. This fact gives the eyewitness accounts an air of particular credibility. It is usually emphasized that the witness is above suspicion because he was never distinguished for his lively imagination or credulousness, but, on the contrary, for his cool judgment and critical reason. In just these cases, the unconscious has to resort to particularly drastic measures in order to make its contents perceived. It does this most vividly by projection, by extrapolating its contents into an object which then reflects back what had previously laid hidden in the unconscious. Projection can be observed at work everywhere, in mental illness, in ideas of persecution and hallucinations, in so-called normal people who see the mote in their brother's eye without seeing the beam in their own, and finally, in extreme form, in political propaganda. Long essay. Paragraph 610. Projections have what we might call different ranges, according to whether they stem from merely personal conditions or from deeper collective ones. Personal repressions and things of which we are unconscious manifest themselves in our immediate environment, in our circle of relatives and acquaintances. Collective contents such as religious, philosophical, political, and social conflicts select projection carriers of a corresponding kind. Freemasons, Jesuits, Jews, capitalists, Bolsheviks, imperialists, etc. In the threatening situation of the world today, when people are beginning to see that everything is at stake, the projection creating fantasy soars beyond the realm of earthly organizations and moves into the heavens, into interstellar space, where the rulers of human fate, the gods, once had their abode in the planets. Our earthly world is split into two halves, and nobody knows where a helpful solution is to come from. Even people who would never have thought that a religious problem could be a serious matter that concerned them personally are beginning to ask themselves fundamental questions. Under these circumstances, it would not be at all surprising if those sections of the community who asked themselves nothing were visited by visions, by a widespread myth seriously believed in by some and rejected as absurd by others. Eyewitnesses of unimpeachable honesty announce the signs in the heavens which they have seen with their own eyes, and the marvelous things they have experienced which pass human understanding. Let's see how. Okay. Paragraph 611. All these reports have naturally resulted in a clamorous demand for explanation. Initial attempts to explain the UFOs as Russian or American inventions soon came to grief on their apparently weightless behavior, which is unknown to Earth dwellers. Human fantasy, already toying with the idea of space trips to the moon, therefore had no hesitation in assuming that intelligent beings of a higher order had learnt how to counteract gravitation and, by dint of using interstellar magnetic fields as a source of power, to travel through space with the speed of light. The recent atomic explosions on the Earth, it was conjectured, had aroused the attention of these so very much more advanced dwellers on Mars or Venus, who were worried about possible chain reactions and the consequent destruction of our planet. Since such a possibility would constitute a catastrophic threat to our neighboring planets, their inhabitants felt compelled to observe how things were developing on Earth, fully aware of the tremendous cataclysm our clumsy nuclear experiments might unleash. The fact that the UFOs neither land nor on Earth nor show the least inclination to get into communication with human beings is met by the explanation that these visitors, despite their superior knowledge, are not at all certain of being well received on Earth, for which reason they carefully avoid all intelligent contact with humans. But because they, as befits superior beings, conduct themselves quite inoffensively, they would do the Earth no harm and are satisfied with an objective inspection of airfields and atomic installations. Just why these higher beings, who show such a burning interest in the fate of the Earth, have still not found some way of communicating with us after 10 years, despite their knowledge of languages, remains shrouded in darkness. Other explanations have therefore been sought. For instance, that a planet has got into difficulties, perhaps through the drying up of its water supplies, or a loss of oxygen, or overpopulation, and is playing for a pied-à-terre. The reconnaissance patrols are going to work with the utmost care and circumspection, despite the fact that they have been giving a benefit performance in the heavens for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Since the Second World War, they have appeared in masses, obviously because an imminent landing is planned. Recently, their harmlessness has been doubted. There are also stories by so-called eyewitnesses who declare that they have seen UFOs landing with, of course, English-speaking occupants. These space guests are sometimes idealized figures along the lines of technological angels who are concerned for our welfare, sometimes dwarfs with enormous heads bursting with intelligence, sometimes lemur-like creatures covered with hair and equipped with claws, or dwarf fish monsters clad in armor and looking like insects. Okay, I'm getting myself a little bit hypnotized here, so I am going to discontinue the reading at this point and continue tomorrow because I just can't keep going. And so we've been going for 48 minutes. Thank you for joining me today. Are there any comments or questions about what I've read so far? This has been part one. Obviously, there's going to be 8 or 10 parts to this reading because I'm only about 15 pages into a 110-page essay. So, but I need to rest my eyes and stop reading at this point. So thank you for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow. Take care now. Bye.